Hello everyone, it's Friday and you're watching Within the Frame, where we delve deeper into the top stories not only in South Korea but across the globe. I'm Kim Gi-hyeon. On Wednesday this week, ruling People Power Party elected four-term lawmaker Kim Gi-hyeon as its new chairman. And in front of the newly elected party leader lie many challenges, including winning the general election next year and resolving the standoff with main opposition Democratic Party of Korea. Meanwhile, the DP's leader Lee Jae-myung barely dodged an arrest motion with just a slightest margin quite recently. Yet this sparked a feud in the party because the motion obtained more support than the party had originally expected. And what are the details of the ruling PPP's national convention? And how is the DP trying to overcome internal conflict? And how would the political scene unfold? For an in-depth analysis on South Korea's recent political scene, we invited Arirang's very own political correspondent Han Sung-woo into the studio. Sung-woo, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
And we also have Professor Han Shuttle of Yonsei University in the studio as well. Professor Shuttle, welcome and thank you for your time.
Hi, Bo-kyung. Good to see you.
All right, first question to you, Sung-woo. Four-term lawmaker Kim Gi-hyeon, he was elected the new leader of the ruling People Power Party on Wednesday. Give us the details first.
Yes, let me fill everyone in on that, Bo-kyung. I was on site covering the ruling party's national convention held Wednesday in Goyang City, where National Assembly member Kim Gi-hyeon claimed a majority of the roughly 460,000 votes that registered party members cast over a four-day period until Tuesday. The 55.1% turnout rate was a record high for the party, by the way. Why don't we shift our attention to the screen to get a clearer picture of how the former mayor of Ulsan City took the post. Kim, who had widely been considered the frontrunner, won 52.93%, a majority of the ballots, eliminating the scenario of a runoff vote that would have taken place today and tomorrow. Here's a moment from his acceptance speech.
Let's unite as one and sweep next year's general elections. The authority held by a party chairman is not a right, but rather a duty and responsibility.
In the end, runner-up An Chol-soo finished the race with 23.37% of the votes, failing to challenge Kim to a one-on-one debate, which would have already taken place by now had no candidate won a majority. Meanwhile, the other two candidates, Chon Ha-ram, head of a regional chapter of the party in Jeollanam-do province, and former Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-won each took 14.98 and 8.72% of the votes.
Right, I see. Now, Professor, the cumulative voter turnout among the members of the ruling People Power Party reached 55.1%, and this is an all-time high. Now, what aspect of the leadership contest do you believe attracted the most attention this time around?
Yeah, a lot of us watching this have been asking that question all week, and it's
Right.
interesting to try to get under it a little bit. I mean, I think the presence of An Chol-soo in the ruling party now, first as a kind of kingmaker and would-be co-president as this was billed about a year ago when the presidential election took place, and the transition from that over the past year. Things have not turned out that way. Nobody would say right now that An Chol-soo looks very much like a co-president. He's become more of a thorn in the side of President Yoon as the leader of a rival faction within the ruling party. The two have very clearly fallen out, and even though An didn't get enough followers to mount a really close challenge to Kim Gi-hyeon. On the other hand, he was there and he did have, the 23%. That's nothing to sneeze at. That suggests there's going to be a minority faction here.
Right.
And I think the other aspect of it that's kind of interesting is we have to keep in mind that President Yoon is a relative newcomer to the PPP and to elected politics. So there's still a little bit of a vacuum, I think, in the ruling party that is in the process of, you could say, backfilling over the last couple of years. So the allegiances of the party rank and file have been very much up for grabs. And in the end, we can see that the president's people really did a lot of work to get out the vote, even to the consternation of those now defeated opponents.
Right, interesting. Now, Sung-woo, Kim is seen as a Yoon loyalist, so I think it would be safe to say that his election was an ideal outcome for a presidential office. And I'm also aware that 5 new members of the party's Supreme Council were elected on Wednesday as well. Are they all part of the pro-Yoon faction of the party also?
They are, Po-kyung, all Yoon loyalists, all five of them. So from the perspective of the nation's top office, Wednesday's results were a major boost. Let me just name them here. They are former lawmaker Kim Gi-hyeon, former spokesperson for Yoon's presidential campaign Kim Byung-min, current National Assembly member Cho Soo-jin, and North Korean defector turned lawmaker Tae Young-ho. Last but not least, winning the slot designated for younger politicians aged under 45 was Chang Ye-chan, who served as an aide to Yoon during his campaign for the presidency. I'd like to add that Yoon himself was present at the national convention.
우리 국민의힘 당내 선거에서는 승자도 패자도 없습니다. 우리 당 구성원 모두 첫째도 국민, 둘째도 국민, 셋째도 국민만을 생각하고 함께 전진해야 합니다.
His speech came an hour before the results were announced, but it just goes to show how closely the presidential office was following the race. It was the first time in 7 years that a sitting commander-in-chief attended the national convention of a ruling party, the last one to do so being former President Park Geun-hye in 2016.
Right. Now, Professor, speaking of the speech President Yoon Suk-yeol gave on that day, I'd like to ask you, what can we deduce from it, and how do you see his administration moving forward now that the backing from the ruling People Power Party has been strengthened?
Well, Bo-kyung, that quotation we just heard, no winners, no losers, that was kind of the takeaway. That was the soundbite, so to speak, from this speech. And I suppose we can take it in two different ways. I mean, it's either President Yoon being very gracious to his, would-be rivals that were competing for the party chairman's position, the people that were not backed by him in the presidential office, saying, okay, well, it's over, we're all unified as a party now, none of you lost, we're going to be magnanimous here and work with you all to cooperate. On the other hand, he could also be kind of tacitly acknowledging that Kim Gi-hyeon, even though he won pretty handily compared to the other three, that if you add it all up, it's not as if his faction of the party necessarily has an overwhelming mandate either. He got slightly more than half the vote in this very high turnout election for a party chairman. So obviously he's got some work to do even within his party to get a legislative agenda through. So if we start to talk about pension reform, can he cobble together that coalition even within the minority party? Because let's face it, the ruling party is still the minority in the National Assembly right now.
Right.
Can they even get themselves united on the pension issue in the Assembly over the next year? Or will they have to wait and try to get a majority in the 2024 national election? Same will be said for the work week reform changes that he's proposing, this idea of making the work week more flexible. If he's going to get these agenda items through, somehow the party's got to come together a little bit more cohesively than it has.
Right. So, Song-woo, I'd like to tap on some of the challenges that are ahead for Kim, both inside and outside the party. What are they?
Glad you asked, Po-kyung, because the ruling party's new chairman has a lot on his plate at the moment. Most importantly, he will be expected to guide the People Power Party to victory in the 2024 general elections, with the party aiming to secure a majority in parliament and help move President Yoon's agenda forward. The National Assembly, as we all know, is currently controlled by the Democratic Party of Korea, which has been using its majority power for quite some time now to force through bills and motions with the 169 out of 299 seats it holds. Another task will be to prevent further division within the party over nominations for next year's elections by squashing the bad blood between pro-Yoon lawmakers and other factions in the party, such as those loyal to Lee Jae-myung, the party's former chief, who was ousted last year over a sexual bribery scandal. As for outside the party, ties with the main opposition Democratic Party are likely to remain rocky for the time being. Why? Several reasons, but it's mainly due to the ongoing prosecutorial investigations into opposition leader Lee Jae-myung over allegations of corruption. The Democratic Party is accusing President Yoon and the ruling party of orchestrating the probes to take Lee down, a conflict I'll explain in further detail a little later.
Right. So, Professor, it seems like there is a lot on Kim Gi-hyeon's plate right now. And thus, I'd like to ask you, what kind of leadership do you believe Kim would have to show to overcome this kind of conflicts?
I think picking up on the points Sungwoo just made very well. One is leadership to unify the party and to try to bring those factions together. And then second, it'll have to be leadership for country. And that will take some work, both in domestic politics and also in international relations, too. Aside from some of the other issues we were just mentioning, there's still the persistent inflation that this administration really has to try to get under control. Of course, that's a global problem. In some ways, it's out of the hands of any national government, but still there's a real, I think, push at this point, and the public is ready to apply pressure to the president and hold him to stabilizing the economy and easing the inflation. There's also a lot of concern about the real estate market still and the uncertainty over interest rates going forward. So there's some really big timber coming in the macroeconomic picture, I think, over the next year or so. And then with regard to foreign policy, there's the president's initiative toward Japan, this new stretch of rapprochement. And I do think that has some potential to be polarizing. If you look at the news coverage, it was pretty well split, the reaction to the president's March 1st speech, where the conservative voices in the media are applauding it, and maybe some of the moderate voices are applauding it as well. But there are some concerns, especially in the more liberal or progressive sectors of the media, the DP side of the country's news organizations, a lot of commentary worrying that the president is somehow selling out the country's national interests and is too quick to make nice with Japan without holding Japan properly accountable for its treatment of its history in the past and its past misdeeds. So even if it's useful in terms of strategy for the country to go forward with a tighter alliance with Japan and the US, I think it's going to be a really tricky path for the president to navigate that and still come across to enough citizens as putting the interests of the country first and not compromising them. And that will take some balancing.
Right, I see. Now, Sungwoo, let's take a look at the main opposition, Democratic Party of Korea here. Just weeks ago, the National Assembly narrowly rejected a motion to consent to the arrest of opposition party leader Lee Jae-myung over allegations of corruption and bribery. Could you tell us what this was all about?
Sure thing. Back in late February, South Korea's National Assembly, after a considerable delay on the day due to vote counting complications, rejected the motion seeking parliamentary consent to arrest Democratic Party of Korea Chairman Lee Jae-myung over allegations of corruption and third-party bribery. In an anonymous vote during a plenary session, 139 out of 297 lawmakers present voted for the motion, while 138 voted against. There were also 9 abstentions and 11 invalid votes. While Parliament is in session, prosecutors had required by law a majority of registered lawmakers to be present when the motion was put to a vote, and a majority of those lawmakers in attendance to approve it, meaning 149 votes for the motion were needed for it to be passed. But considering the Democratic Party holds 169 seats, the results mean several opposition legislators turned their backs on their chairman. The result came less than 2 weeks after the prosecution requested an arrest warrant for Lee, the first time in the nation's constitutional history that prosecutors had sought such a warrant for the sitting leader of a main opposition party.
The investigations are pointing not to a certain incident, but rather a certain person. It's a judicial hunt that won't stop until it seizes its target.
He's mainly being accused of having used his former position as mayor of Seongnam City to grant favors to property developers so they could pocket some $610 million in illegal proceeds for the Daejangdong development project at the expense of the city government, which prosecutors say suffered some $380 million worth of financial damages.
Think of it like this. A phone salesman prearranged to sell a cell phone worth $1,000 to an acquaintance for $100 while keeping it a secret from the phone store's owner. That means the owner lost $900. There's no way one can say he made $100 thanks to the salesman.
He's also suspected of taking bribes from corporations via Seongnam Football Club in the mid-2010s. Despite the prosecution failing to win parliamentary consent, it's widely expected they will indict the opposition leader without detaining him and possibly request another arrest warrant after further investigation into other allegations.
Right, I see. Now, Professor, it seems like this internal division is not just the ruling People Party's own problem, but also DP's. How do you think it's going to unfold?
Right, as Sung-woo just pointed out, this investigation is continuing, and Lee Jae-myung is not out of the woods. So we had approximately 30 lawmakers, that seems to be the guess that we're reading in the news coverage, about 30 lawmakers within the DP that voted to support the arrest warrant for the leader of their own party. Now, I guess the party leadership is billing these 30 people as turncoats. I think the phrase was subak in Korean, or watermelon, you know, that they're one color on the outside and that they're red on the inside, which is the color of the PPP. So, you know, I guess that's the DP trying to put its best face on this and frame these people as disloyal. But I think what you've got are 30 people or so, and there's probably more silent supporters of theirs that did not necessarily go with them, that were not part of this mutiny. But there's a faction now within the DP that thinks it's time for Lee Jae-myung to go, that is disenchanted with him. And you know, things seem to be deteriorating as the investigation continues. This week there was news that a fifth person tied to Lee Jae-myung has committed suicide. This latest case was his former executive assistant. And while that doesn't tell us anything about how the investigation's going, it tells us that there are ripple effects of this investigation that are still continuing, so-called shockwaves. So all of this might be the beginning of the end of Lee Jae-myung, even though there's nobody clearly standing out yet from the DP, waiting in the wings to move in and take his place.
Right. And so, Sung-woo, how is Lee Jae-myung trying to overcome the fact that he narrowly dodged the motion for his own arrest?
Well, Po-kyung, in an apparent effort to regroup his divided party, the opposition leader has focused much of his party's attention to the livelihoods of the people in the country. Local media outlets have been calling the move a livelihood drive. For example, he's reiterated his concerns over rising heating costs and energy bills, as well as household debt, urging the Democratic Party to come up with bills to support the self-employed in particular, as well as small business owners. He's also reportedly increased the number of lunch and dinner appointments with lawmakers from his party in what could be viewed as an effort to gauge the political landscape and his current standing, while possibly persuading them to support his now less stable chairmanship.
Right, I see. Now, Professor, Kim's election victory and Lee narrowly avoiding his arrest motion, how do you see South Korea's political scene as we move forward?
Well, I think one common denominator here, Bo-kyung, is we have both parties right now, both main parties, with disruptive and fairly vocal minority factions, which means that party discipline, a term that we like to use in political science, you know, the extent that the rank and file of a political party will get behind the leadership and uniformly, you know, vote in the same way, you know, keeping the party lines intact. Party discipline might be somewhat lacking with both the PPP and the DP going forward for the next year and a half. It's possible, though, that the PPP is in somewhat of an advantage position now. They've solidified, they may very well solidify behind Kim Gi-hyeon, we'll see. And President Yoon's approval rating, despite all the uncertainty that we've been talking about tonight, it checked in at 44% just this week, which is fairly high given the way things have been going for him so far. It's not a majority in public opinion support, but it's not down in the dumps either. I think it was in the mid-30s several months ago. So he's been making a comeback somewhat with public opinion polling. The DP, on the other hand, still has the majority. They've still got that in the assembly, but with the uncertainty surrounding their leadership right now, it's hard to say, you know, where things will go in terms of whether they'll have much impact in the assembly over the next year before the election. So I think both parties, for various reasons, are going to be looking to 2024 quite early to see what kinds of changes might be in the wings.
Right, I see. I'd like to ask more questions to our professor and our Sung-woo, but unfortunately this is all the time we have for today's edition. But thank you, Professor Sharo, for your insights. Of course, thank you, Sung-woo, for your time.
Well,
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, this is all for Within the Frame tonight. We will be next Monday with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the weekend. Goodbye.